A few days ago, we were revealed to the most awaited nation, Snezhnaya. Now technically, we are already in Snezhnaya since Notcry is a part of it, but the reason people thought of it as a separate nation is because of it being an autonomous region. Even the way the casts and the NPCs talk about Notcry is as if they're a separate nation, but yeah, they're still within the same nation. But let's be real. I'm pretty sure they were planning to add Notcry sometime around Sumeru or Natlan because the mention of the three moon goddesses were a lot more prominent there and they needed to fill in Genshin's plot holes. Honestly, it's good that they do that because Notcry has been a good place for us to really learn and study the deepest lore of Genshin Impact. Without it, I honestly would have a lot more questions about Genshin's lore when the actual Snezhnaya hits. Anyways, in today's video, we'll get to learn more about the behind-the-scenes video of Snezhnaya, my view as an artist, and we can get a little bit sentimental at the end. As always, don't forget to give this video a like and comment so the channel can be noticed by the algorithm. My name is Neko and I make lore and commentary videos on this channel to keep you company. But before that, let's pay some bills. With Snezhnaya coming up along with insane banners, it's no surprise if a lot of us want to pull for these beautiful shiny characters. Llama and Nefer are coming up soon, along with Nicole and Lohan, who are going to be powerful support and DPS at the same time. If you want to pull for these characters, then consider using Loot Bar. Loot Bar is finally back with upgraded security and reliability. They provide an instant delivery service, balanced cost saving with 100% security, supports all kinds of consoles, and supports Miliaster Wonderland as well. All you need is to enter your UID, no personal information is required, and your items will arrive instantly. Over 44,000 Trustpilot reviews are showing their satisfaction after using Loot Bar, and their customer service is always available if you need assistance. Other than Genshin Impact, Loot Bar is also available for other games as well, such as Honkai Star Rail, Wuthering Waves, Arkana Zenfield, etc. Click the link in the description below and enter LOCKUP code for 5% off during checkout. Now let's continue with the content. Now there are three different categories of what is being mentioned in this video. First is the lore, second is gameplay, and third is the developer's thoughts about the game in a more sentimental way. We'll explore all three one by one because I too, as a day one player, have a lot of things to say. So before we start, we are revealed that Snezhnaya is going to be released on August 12th, the same date of the upcoming solar eclipse, and also how I long to embrace. Yes, deadass. This is the exact same date when Alicia's Because of Your Animated Short got released on Cyan server. I joked about this a lot that the Saritsa might be in Alicia XP, and while I know this is just a joke, the fact the date is coincidentally the same just makes me laugh. The Saritsa is an Alicia XP all along, and Piero is the Kevin XP all along. Oh god, I should make a joke video out of this. Anyways, back on track. Now the first thing we actually get to see is the sneak peek of the nation itself. When I first saw this, I was like, damn, it's so beautiful, like really beautiful. At the end of the video, Aquera mentioned that Snezhnaya will be the last chapter of Teyvat, which in a way he is kinda right because the story in Teyvat will end in this nation. However, you have to remember that the story of Genshin Impact will not yet conclude in here because we still have Khaenri'ah, likely Celestia if they decide to make this as a nation, and finally Genshin Impact 2.0, which likely plays in another planet called Andromeda. If you explore the Temple of Space, you might encounter a prison across the Traveler siblings' coffin where it talks about an outlander from Andromeda and is the writer of Vera's Melancholy. It may be possible that the prisoner is Mage O from the Hexen Circle, but just know that Andromeda is a possible planet that we might explore in the next series of Genshin Impact. I'll talk more about this later, now back on topic. According to a brief history of Pale Starborn and Flintz's Serenity Pot voice line, this place seems to be Snezhnograd, and the place beside it seems to be Glupov. Now looking at Snezhnaya's nation logo, it seems there are a lot of rounded tip roofs in Snezhnaya, which could possibly hint that Snezhnograd's aesthetics are inspired by Russia's capital city. Moscow, more specifically, Moscow's famous landmark called the Red Capitol, where Saint Basil Cathedral resides. Now, I'm not an expert when it comes to this history, but the reason this cathedral was made is to commemorate the victories that the Russians had to face against the Tatars. With that in mind, this could mean that Snezhnaya is the same exact thing where the architectures could be made to commemorate their victories against their enemies. Belytsar actually faced a lot of enemies back then, and you can watch my video talking about the Wings of Silent Moon to learn more about it. Actually, do that! This context is very relevant for what's to come in this video. So the developers mentioned the ancient race of the Fae. Again, we talk about this plenty of times, but let me get to the quick history lesson here. So, the Fae were created by the Hyperboreans under the orders of the first angel, Koitar. The Frost Moon, Canaan, whether aware or not, aided the Hyperboreans by giving her moonlight to them and was forged using the bones of giant beasts. While not written, it's very likely that some of the angels were aware of this and aided Koitar in this act of creation. Of course, the heavenly principles did not take kindly to this and destroyed Hyperborea along with the majority of the Fae after the celestial nail was casted. Most of them are turned into icy mists, but a lot of them also survived to the Fae we see today. Now, after Linnea's character story, we are revealed that there seems to be more races that Koitar created. Whether they're intentional or not, it is clear that there were a lot of Fae created under her command. There are 9 types of Fae, with 6 being the most common, while 3 being the rarer ones. The common ones are Villa, Damavoy, Leshy, Volkotlak, Snegovic or Snegorochka for the female term, and Jack Frost, while the rarer ones are the Lantern Fae, Augury Birds, and Sirens. So far there are 3 playable Fae, and ironically, 2 of them are the rarer ones. We have Jack Frost, which is Lumi, Augury Birds, which is Linnea, and Lantern Fae being Flints. If Genshin is daring enough, then Selino will be the 4th playable Fae and 3rd playable Fae within the rarest race. Funnily enough, we have no idea whether Belytsar, or his real name Monomak Snezhny, is a Fae or not. It is possible that he is a Fae considering the entirety of Snezhnaya became a snowlands after his grief for the loss of his brother. But at the end of the day, Bely is the first Cry Archon and also the very first Tsar of Snezhnaya. Now, the developers also acknowledge that the hymns of the Far North feels like not Cry version of Before Sun and Moon, which, by the way, yeah, I actually made a joke about it in one of my thumbnails. That being said, it's possible that we'll be learning more of Teyvat's history similarly like we learn from those books as well. Now we'll get back to this, I promise. Another interesting thing they mentioned here is how they mentioned the Archons gave up their noses willingly, except of course Mavuika. I have talked about this on my channel plenty of times already, and I watched Sevi's video not too long ago, which, yeah, I agree, that the Archons are not stupid enough to just give it away willingly and seem to be at a very small price. The interesting thing about this is how they show Zhongli's cutscene plenty of times, which, if you don't remember, Zhongli handed over his noses willingly after he witnessed that Liyue can stand on their own feet. He said there's a contract needed to be done, which I always wonder if this contract is related to how he himself doesn't like the heavenly principles. But now that I think about it, all of them don't seem to really care much about the heavenly principles like anyone else, and they seem to be fully aware of what the gnosis actually are. Fancy revealed that he just lets Senora take it, Jolie gave his away for a contract, A doesn't give a shit about her gnosis, Nahida gave both gnosis at the price of knowledge, Nuvula doesn't need it anymore because the Oratrice fulfilled its job, and only Mavuika has hers. My theory in this channel is that Mavuika is not aware of what the gnosis actually is, because she is a normal human with human lifespan. Therefore, she has no idea that her gnosis is the corpse of the 3rd descender. However, I can acknowledge that one of you pointed out that she is likely aware, but needs the gnosis in order to govern Atlan since the nation has no gods to begin with. With Song of the Welkin Moon ending in possibly 3 months as per the announced dates, we will probably visit Atlan again before the Song of Welkin Moon ends, or during the Snezhnaya arc. It's possible that the moment we visit Natlan again, Marijivari will open as well. Another thing that they mention is Snezhnaya's music, which will reflect the nation's struggle in fate, more solemnity, and the long history of preservation. We'll talk about the preservation part in a bit because I have a lot of things to say about that, but it seems we are in for a depressing storyline in Snezhnaya. At the beginning of the video, we were reminded by the developers that the Fatui are not as black and white as we think. In fact, they are quite within the gray area. We know that Snezhnaya is a very advanced nation, and I mean, just look at the train and the bureau in Northcry. But even with all that, we eventually learned that the Fatui's goal is a lot deeper than we might have thought. We also learned that the Heavenly Principles are not as kind as they are, likely because of their nature being an AI to begin with. If this theory is correct, of course. The Traveler is friends with some of them, and if you really think about it, 50% of them are the Travelers' friends. Capitano, Colombina, Arlecchino, Santrone, Child, and finally Scaramouche. Yeah, that's 6 out of 11. Maybe 12 if you count Piero in it, because we still have no idea who is the 10th seat of the Fatui Harbingers. Regardless, you get the idea. The Fatui is not as black and white as we thought. Each of the Harbingers enter on their own accounts, and like what Capitano said, their freedom takes precedence over the Saritsa's orders. Next, they mention cryo being the idea of preservation. If you have no idea what it means, here's a small analogy. You can think of it like your fridge or your fridge's freezer, where it exists in order to preserve your food for a longer period of time. The reason is to prevent bacteria and microbes from growing because the water in the meat is frozen solid. You might also remember in one of SpongeBob's episode where Squidward got locked inside Krusty Krab's freezer and was frozen until thousands of years later. The idea is basically the same, but of course that in itself is bogus because humans can't live in that extremely low temperature without proper clothing. From what the developer said, it seems that is where they get the idea from, which I think is quite smart. And it seems they are preserving both Signora and Capitano since these two, despite being dead, have their memories completely preserved encased in ice. We know that we will meet Capitano again eventually, and I think it goes the same with Signora. Imagine if we once get playable Signora though. Signora mains are going to cry when they see her coffin at Zelpuliani Palace. But one thing they didn't mention is how cryo is the embodiment of irony. You might heard about this plenty of times already, but a lot of the cryo characters received their vision after they experienced an ironic life events like how Diona got hers by being a mixologist despite hating it. Risley being the fortress of Meropete's Duke even though he himself used to be an inmate, Sidlali got hers after not receiving an ancient name for a very long time, and many more. It's more or less the same with the Saritsa where she loves Tevad but has to burn it as the most benevolent act according to Piero. The developer actually said that cryo were to seal away ancient forbidden power or concept and was hidden by the world. And what if the traveler can tap into it because they are a descender? Y'all, Wings of the Silent Moon again. Beliansar was involved in that wing, and even if he isn't, the main character of that wing is a Snow King. So of course, cryo plays a huge part in that wing. I get it though, I may be overreacting, but I can't believe this wing continuously became so relevant as we go through new patches. And no one talks about it. Please y'all, you need to read that wing's lore. I promise you, everything starts to click once you read and understand the meaning of it. But speaking of cryo, they also mentioned that cryo will be the core part of Snezhnaya, obviously. When they mention that, I think it'll be similar to Phlogiston where even though it's not really pyro per se, it is heavily associated with pyro regardless. The same with Snezhnaya later on, it seems they'll be adding something similar to it, and I assume the aurora that they usually show in each and every Fatui related videos might play a part in it as well. Aside from that, they hint that we'll be getting a similar reaction gameplay like Lunar Reactions, where some of the cryo related reactions will receive a new gameplay. But speaking of gameplay, this is where we enter the gameplay section. Now that you come this far, it's good to assume that you enjoyed this video. It really makes me happy that you do, and I appreciate it for even staying this long. I would like to let you know that I am doing everything in this video by myself, whether doing research, script writing, drawing, and even editing the video. And I am taking care of my family as a professional male wife material. So yeah, a lot of effort was made in making this video. So if you can hit the tiny like and subscribe button, you're helping this channel a lot more than you might have thought. With that said, let's continue. Even though this section will focus more on gameplay, I will mention some of the artistic parts of this game as well. They mention some interesting details of Snezhnaya's behind the scenes, so be ready for some interesting fun facts from your lore artist. One thing they mention is how the game will revolve around Snezhnaya's train, where it'll be a challenge to make the train a lot more interactive. I get the general consensus here because generally speaking, trains are made to commute from place to place. You don't really have a lot of things to do there, and I find it interesting when they say museum type of train. I don't know if you guys watch normie content, but the first thing that came to mind is Sophia Nygaard's video where she explores trains all over the world, especially the overnight train ones. Bet you didn't see that coming, did you? The cheaper ones only have seats that are at least comfortable enough. Some have beds, some have cafes, and the more impressive part, some have bars, which of course are the high-end ones. I think this is the general idea that the Genshin team is going for, and they mentioned that in the video. Now, Snezhnaya, as far as I know from the lore, is going to be huge, so I won't be surprised if the train in this game is going to be the main gameplay of Snezhnaya as well. I will talk about this further in my Snezhnaya explanation video, but based on what is said in the lore, Snezhnaya is the whole area on the northernmost part of Teyvat. I'm not joking, it is huge. When I talk about these sort of topics, I get a lot of comments that say, well, it's just a game. They could have just made it as is, watched references and done. And that's where things go downhill because these sort of things need a lot of research. I find the way the developers talk about trains interesting because they thought about the smallest details possible. How is it going to interact in co-op? How are they going to implement trains in Genshin Impact? How are they going to make the trains more interactive? And how is it going to interact with the environment? All of these are important questions because even though they made trains before, i.e. the Aqua Bus in Fontaine, it's not the same as normal trains you know in real life since the Aqua Bus is powered using Nucia and traverses in water. They don't even mention snow yet, so these sort of things are important questions to answer. Okay, I geek too much at this point, but you get the gist. After they talk about trains, they eventually talk about elemental reactions. Now we kinda expect this to be the case since they have been experimenting on new reactions since Fontaine, where Nucia created a reaction to certain enemies and environments. I get that Dendro is arguably the first one, but in my defense, Dendro is a fundamental element to begin with, so it doesn't count. They talk about how they are going to implement Cryo as the IT reaction. And it seems they're aiming for the new reactions like how they did with Lunar reactions. So, Lunar reactions, as you all can already tell, heavily emphasize on Hydro, with Columbina being the Archon equivalent of Notcry and the Song of Vulcan Moon. I think it makes sense why they made her Hydro because she is the melting form of ice. I don't know, that's just my stupid mind going silly again. Regardless, from the way they talk about Cryo, it seems they're going to make it similar to how it is with Fontaine, Notlan, and Notcry all together in both combat and environments. If you remember, Nucia is quite useless in battle, but it is quite impactful on exploration. Neither Lunar reactions or Night Soul were needed that much by exploration standards since they are mostly tied to the characters, but Night Soul's case is similar to Nucia, where all of the Natladies are capable to utilize Night Soul blessing mechanics to use their skills within the longer period. With that being the case, I would expect that Snezhnaya might play within that route as well. Anyways, there are plenty of existing reactions we know of, such as Superconduct, Melt, Frozen, Cryoswirl, Cryocrystallize, and finally, Shatter. Out of the 6, it seems we'll get at least 3 of them getting an upgrade, and I would assume that Swirl, Crystallize, and Superconduct are getting it since they are the neglected reactions. Yulames are going crazy with this one. If you remember the last year's Imagineering Theater, we actually got an interesting reaction called Rhinegrass. I made a whole video talking about it because Alhaitham became broken as hell and I just have to do that. Now, I'll make a separate video talking about Rhymegrass in near future, but to put it simply, Rhymegrass has two states: increase cryo and dendro damage that the enemies take, and deal DOT depending on the triggering elements in a circle impact. If I can describe it, it's almost like Quicken, Burning, and Ferridescent whenever had a baby and created Rhymegrass. Important to note that the debuff it does is different from decreased elemental resistance, meaning it's a different type of debuff in order to avoid diminishing returns. So when I did this with Alhaitham, Nahida, Sidlali, and Auron's team with only level 1 Rhymegrass Blessing, he was able to shred the enemies quickly. I'm expecting that Rhymegrass will have at least a circle impact, and whether it'll increase damage that the enemies take or DOT, only time will tell. I just hope it's broken enough for my husband. They also mentioned the Traveler's power as a Descender. You should already know what a Descender is, and it's quite interesting that they touch on this since the Traveler doesn't feel strong in the game, if that makes sense. To be honest with you all, that's how it should be because we start this journey from zero. Personally, I don't like how a lot of games portray the MC as this extremely strong and he's actually a god type of character from the get-go, because it kind of ruins the immersion, and I prefer that we know who the MC is as we go. We saw how weak the Traveler is multiple times, and that's okay, because they're not the only main star of the show. I like the idea that we're the observers at first and we get to change the storyline because we were never meant to be there in the first place. That's what a lot of gacha games do in their story. But I feel like Genshin Impact does it best because we eventually grew to learn not in just 1 or 2 updates, but we learn who they actually are slowly but surely, and it took us 2 years to finally learn that the Traveler is a Descender. Now, the reason why I don't put this in the lore section is because this will be relevant in gameplay. At the end of Song of the Welkin Moon, Columbina helped the Traveler's power by amplifying his resonance towards the elements. Based on what Aquaira said, the Traveler will receive a power-up in Snezhnaya, and it will reflect his power as a Descender. If that's the case, then I don't think we'll receive the power of Cryo immediately, like how it is with Natlan. I also find this to be necessary because Teyvat's chapter, or at least the story in Teyvat, will end in Snezhnaya, because Kai and Ria will likely not be placed under Teyvat anymore, but likely somewhere else. If they want to keep the Traveler relevant meta-wise, then at least they should reflect that in his gameplay. I personally don't have very high hopes when it comes to this, but if they want to make him actually relevant meta-wise, then I would love to have him at least on the same level as the Trailblazers in Honkai Star Rail, because they are quite relevant until this day. They also mention immersion. Basically, they found the early days of Genshin Impact a little bit too simple, and in order to fully immersify the Travelers into the world of Teyvat, they are planning to continue what they were doing in Outcry, which I think is already a good enough direction as it is. I enjoyed the little bits of interactions with it as of now, and I personally love the Traveler tales where it doesn't really have anything to do with lore, like at all. Some characters like Zubai and Linnea have their own unique exploration talent, and while I get some people say it's pay-to-win content, I don't mind it really because you can't have Zubai's Parasol and the portable teleport point at the same time, neither I use Linnea's mining and animal catching skill that much. You can do these things outside of their talents anyway, so it doesn't really matter whether you have them or not. I just think of this as a bonus because you're pulling for the characters either from their design or their skills. That's it. Alright, speaking of immersion, they mention how they want to make the Travelers feel more immersed with the cutscenes and gameplay, something I find interesting since we have experienced this with Kosoitot's battle and the Torres battle. Farca's story quest is also the same, and you can even count Linnea's since their gameplay are quite unique. I don't have a lot of things to say on that. I think it's a great step into a better direction. Finally, they mention the game style. Now this is where my design bachelor degree comes to play. When I say style, I mean the game's ambience. The game is using cel shading and very little realism into the world they are in. This has been quite a topic for some time now since games nowadays try to achieve realism as much as possible. There are some games with compatibility issues but keeping the game as great as it is today, i.e. Wuthering Waves, where I heard the game has been improving like crazy, which good for them. While there are others like Arknights Enfield where they made the game's graphics incredibly realistic while keeping the optimization in impressive, which is also great. Genshin doesn't do any of that, and they kept the style as is, which personally, I don't think they need to change anything when it comes to the game's ambience. It's best if they just keep it as is while keeping up with the trend and demand. Changing the whole thing is just going to be ruining the game in the long run anyway, and I agree with Xiaodan because it'll ruin the dreamlike fantasy that the game always has. Let's pick a small example. Fountains underwater is not realistic because if you dive into the sea, it'll be a dark abyss since very little light pierces the water. If it is meant to be a realistic experience, then it should look like this. Yeah, not a very flattering experience, don't you think? Xiaodan also states to not add too many details like it is with other games because it'll just clutter the environment way too much and lose the sense of focus, which yeah, I also agree with this one. A lot of the time, people think that a lot of details means good art, but I think that is a very overrated opinion because I believe less is more. I mean, we have AI generated images that usually add unnecessary details, and a lot of us don't think that they're good, especially in the eyes of an artist like myself. I get it though, Genshin's character design are extremely detailed, but at the same time, they aren't. A lot of the details were hidden with lower saturation or brightness, which I think is great because they are not the main focus of what you are trying to experience. Now I won't defend this game too much because there are places where they just don't deliver, like in Atlan where I just find a lot of the character design to be a mess. Many of you think I am just a Mawiga and Faresa hater, but sorry not sorry, it is what it is. But again, the fact they even mentioned this is great, and looking at what they have shown us, I think it's good that they acknowledge the game's problems for some time and try to improve them. Now they also mentioned the game is slowly improving its visual design, which is great considering most Mon status mirror characters are quite outdated when it comes to their character visual models. I am expecting a better hair texture for the Traveler and maybe, just maybe, fix the bias details because they look badly pixelated when zoomed in. Rest in peace PlayStation 4, your sacrifice has made a huge impact on this game's visual design. At the end of behind the scenes, they mentioned the future of Genshin Impact, which I won't go too deep with. It's made me a bit sentimental because I can't believe it's been 6 years since the game was released, so why don't we have a heart-to-heart moment ourselves? When the game was released, I was around my 3rd or 4th semester of college, I think it was 4th, and I was making content for another game. At the same time, I remember trying my best to make content out of Genshin Impact for the first time, and frankly, one video did make it where I made a video showcasing Ningguang. That's also the first time I experienced internet hate, by the way, because people gave me death threats over something so trivial. Like, dude, chill, do something else in your life. Regardless, this game has made the life that I have today. If anything, I did not expect that I'll be a Genshin Impact content creator, let alone became a content creator because this is not part of my life plan. Besides, what are the odds of you even becoming a somewhat relevant creator in such a huge space like this? Here's a little content creation secret if you want to become a content creator yourself. When people say being a content creator is pure luck, there is some truth to it. However, you can increase your odds by entering a more niche community, like in my case back then, I created content for some of the most useless characters in Arknights. It gave me a push, but of course I got burnt out, so I stopped making content for 2 years. When I returned to making content, I started with Genshin Impact. I expected my views to drop, and at first, it did, let alone I made content in a large community, which is not ideal if you're starting out. But it also gave me a glimmer of hope since my first video in 2 years gave me a whopping 2,000 views. For a small creator, that's very good, but I also have to try and learn on how I am supposed to make it work. The next video after that didn't do really well, but then the third one is where it gets interesting because I talk about the Imaginary Theater's lore, which, by the way, not many at that time talk about that topic. I remember the Gamer Chronicles talk about it, I think that would talk about it as well, but they were not aligned with my thoughts since I always believed that at the time, the Imaginary Theater was foreshadowing Natlan's story. I'm glad that I made that video because it actually gave a huge jump after that. I continued on the trend and thankfully, it got to where I am today. I really love Genshin Impact and have been playing it since day one. The game was not perfect and it is still not perfect, but it is the game that I really enjoy playing today. I can't really think of any other game that made me feel this way other than Pokemon and Mega Man Star Force because they really gave me an escape from real life. The fact I made Genshin Impact as my money-making machine is just something that I couldn't be more grateful for, especially my late mother who pushed me into doing this content creation thing in the first place. When I think of Genshin, it reminds me of how beautiful the world is, how people are struggling, the joy of finding treasures, and how vibrant the world is compared to what we have in reality. But, unfortunately, yeah, every story has to reach its end eventually, which is why when Aquera mentioned Anders' daughter, I actually cried. Because I cried during Durin's character story. I seriously can't imagine a world without Genshin Impacts now, because not only it became a part of my life, it became the very reason why I was able to help my mother in her medical treatments. I was able to extend her life for some time thanks to my love for this game, and of course, Lutzpar helped out as well from the integrations I have put in for them. I really can't thank you guys enough and this game as well. Because of this community, I am able to do impressive feats. At my early days of doing Genshin content, I always say in my intro that I am juggling my time as a college student, artist, and content creator. But right now, I am juggling my time as an artist, content creator, and taking care of my family by doing most of the housework, which is why you often see me joking about being an ideal male wife. Well, because I am. I mean, look at this. This looks like something you find at a restaurant. It is tough, it really is, but when things get overwhelming, I just go to my room, open Genshin Impact on my phone, and just, well, play. I mean, I do dailies, but sometimes just exploring the world and walking around is quite relaxing in its own way, you know? Now, Aquera claims that they won't extend or prolong the game's ending for commercial purposes, which, Aquera, I am holding your word, because this sort of thing is the reason why a lot of games fell off in the first place. I get it, games need to continue progressing in order to feed your family and employees, but at the same time, there are many ways to extend games without making it too complicated. Man, I really wish the old days where games just made it as a series. Like, the first thing that came to my mind in this case was Mega Man Starfish, right? That game was not perfect. I remember using action replays playing that stupid game, but the story, oh my god, it was just amazing. And even when I replay the game, I really love it because I resonate with the character, the struggle of being a lonely child, depression, and eventually becoming a hero. Man, that is the kind of childhood I dream I want to live in, and low-key, I still want to experience that sort of thing in my age. The game became a 3-part series, and it had such a good ending where Geo, the main character, finally met his lost father. By the way, I just realized when researching this video that they were releasing a legacy collection. Sayu played this and I did not know? YouTube algorithm! F*** you. So yeah, what are the odds? Man, I have to play this game once I get a PC. You have no f***ing idea how much I geeked when I see Sayu's video after I wrote the script. Wait, his voice! Yep. That's me alright. If Genshin is going to make a part 2, I really hope they make it as an entirely new storyline. If they want to keep the Traveler and Paimon, I don't think that's a problem. I just hope that they completely separate Teyvat and possibly Andromeda, because it is a different world at this point. There's no reason to really link them together. Genshin updates are literally what the older games called series, so I just hope that they continue Genshin but just, you know, make the current generation really resonate with the game as is, but also continue on improving. I get that the game has to keep the older players hooked, but I also think they should make the current generations hooked as well by keeping up with what generation nowadays wants and need. We are getting older after all, and there will be a time where we will eventually have to experience something new, something that we can actually resonate with, something that we can relate to. That is where I think Pokemon fails to do, because even though I still like the franchise, I just wish it wasn't a sloppy mess as of late, since they really made the newer Pokemon look really messy, you know. But that's just my sentimental moment here. You are free to disagree, and that's fine. Regardless of what's to come, I am excited for Snezhnaya, and I really hope you do as well. Don't forget to let me know about your thoughts in the comments, because I read every single one of them. Except if you're being an asshole or weird, then I'll likely skip it. Diana!